and welcome back to the Awakening Philosophy podcast. My name is Jed. Thank you for joining us on the quest to discover the nature of our problems and what do we need to do to solve our problems and free ourselves from them. And then from that, as we are learning to do in philosophy, we push the implications. What does that mean? Once you see something, once you understand something, take it further. Where does it go? This is a process of generating new questions from where we're at. This keeps us moving on the path of development, the path of the logos, the path of philosophy. Makes things interesting and fun as well. So, what's an example of pushing the implications to generate new puzzles and questions to keep us on leveling up? Why do I say that? Because to have a question and to hold a question is to be on a quest. The deeper and the greater your questions, the deeper and greater your quest, the more potential for understanding and insight, or using a metaphor from the hero's journey or from video games, leveling up. Personal development. So what was an example of pushing the implications to generate a greater question? Well, if we are on the quest to understand the nature of our problems and understand what's needed to free ourselves from the problems, where does that go? Okay, well, how about this? Okay, let's say we succeed. What do we do with ourselves being problem-free? Having that extra energy and time and less distractions into problems, what can we do with that? Keep going. Is there a reason why we were given problems in the first place? What does that have to do with learning this art of how to understand our problems? Is that a necessary part of our learning? Now here's another one, metaphor. We can use metaphor to generate new questions. Now we talk about the concept as above, so below. So we can use metaphor to take what we see on one level and wonder about how it might apply to a different level. So in the metaphor that we use to explain metaphor, the simple one is you might understand something about how a shepherd relates to a sheep on one level, but then you can wonder, how does my understanding and insight about that relate to how a king should treat his people? Are there some things as below with caring for sheep, as above how a king should care for his subjects? So we can use that to generate new questions. If there are blocks to our everyday physical activities, you talk to the girl you have a crush on, and then you notice yourself acting in a way that will sabotage your goal to develop a relationship with that person, and afterwards you kick yourself and say, every time I am in a situation like that, I tend to act the same way, or I feel the same feeling that makes it difficult. I feel doubt and fear. And if we are discovering a understanding of where these blocks come from, can we, as below, ask a metaphor, how does that apply to our spiritual goals? How does it apply to our reading? How does it apply to my desire to master philosophical midwifery? Is there also a kind of doubt that comes up? Is there also a kind of activity that will cause me to undermine this more meaningful goal of mastering philosophical midwifery? And in spiritual experiences, can we take this learning with us into the more profound experiences that humans can have? So these are questions we can carry with us. Now, there's another way of using metaphor to generate another set of questions that isn't going up to another level, but going sideways. Now, this is key to understanding the dialectic. Why are we even talking about the dialectic? Let's start with that. Well, in our reading of Socrates, he outlines that there are stages to learning philosophy. Before philosophy, there is something called philomathesis, the love of learning, where you make sure you have a nose in the text. So we talk about to be in the game is to have a nose in Plato, a nose in one of those Platonic dialogues, because these are account of Socrates, and Socrates had a mastership of the Logos and spent his life communicating it, helping us realize this is why we're here, to master the Logos, to understand the understandability of ourselves and reality, and to use that understanding as a springboard to direct experience of your highest aspects of your own consciousness, reality, and even yourself. And also to integrate your understanding and highest experiences into your being and function with it so you can benefit. All of these things needed for an art. So we don't have to pick and choose from different people from history, pick a little bit from Kant, pick a little bit from Carl Jung. We don't have to do that. We have a way of understanding the Logos simply by reading the text as it is. And again, as we've been saying on this channel, a possibility that it hasn't been afforded to us until the last decade, because we haven't had a translation that's half decent yet. Fortunately, we have the Balboa translation, which has the ancient Greek and has most of the keywords actually translated the way they should be, often just in the Greek because we don't have an English equivalent, meaning we can actually understand. We don't have to pick opinions that we like based on our own upbringing, culture, prejudices, and pathologos. We can actually understand. And understanding is fantastic for lots of reasons. One is it's inclusive. No one gets kicked out of understanding. Everyone can understand. Doesn't matter what you look like, where you were born, what planet you were born on, what time you were born into. Doesn't matter. It's for everyone. So, having a nose in Socrates to learn the Logos. Having a nose in philosophical midwifery, the book we're in today, is also part of the journey, because you can't do one without the other. You can't reach your highest goals without at the same time addressing the blocks to those highest goals. And vice versa, you can't surface the depth of your blocks without pursuing your highest goals and pursuing them with excellence. What goal could be higher than understanding and experiencing excellence itself in the realm of being? Well, here's something that could be higher. Taking that experience, understanding, and growth and turning it upon yourself in that state and pushing the implications to generate an even deeper question, such as, where did this come from? What is the cause for even this universal, eternal, understandable, experienceable state of excellence itself? Where did this come from? Another example of reflecting on where you are, what you've seen, in a way where you can generate new questions. So you are kind of your own quest giver, because to have a question is to be on a quest. And if you can generate a new question, you're not being given a quest by someone else, as in a video game or in a movie or a story. You're developing it yourself. You are the quest giver, so it's yours. There's some extra benefit to yourself giving birth to your own questions. It's yours. It's significant to you. It's probably more personally meaningful. You probably have more of an interest in it. All things needed to keep the question and develop the depth of curiosity that questions can bring out of you. And of course, the deeper your wonder and confusion and interest and focus, the greater the conditions for new insight. And as we've been talking about in the channel, all of those qualities, these are the qualities of meditation. Whatever meditation you find yourself in, they'll be taking bits of those, selecting from that list. But this game of giving birth to our higher questions for ourselves and carrying it while having a nose in the Logos text of Socrates, having a nose in philosophical midwifery, well, it's having all of them. It would be the new paradigm of meditation and yoga, spirituality. Now, there's something else you have to have your nose in to create a lovely triad for us: your dreams. The same dialectic way of, okay, so let's take a step back. Our question is, what's the significance of the dialectic? Well, having our nose in Socrates, he points out, before you get to philosophy, you have to do something called philomathesis, which is the love of learning. Just closing some tabs here, my computer's running slow. Not allowing me. Let's give it some time. Love of learning, and this is something that we explored in the Phaedo. To repeat, stay in the text, read the text every morning, talk about what you're reading with your friends, meet up with your friends over coffee once a week or a couple of times a week. Oh, there's a coffee. And talk about this. Repetition, remembering. How much of the text can you remember so that you can repeat it? Lying in bed as you go to sleep, wondering about the text. How much of the text could you remember? You have to have, this puts the material in, this memory, repetition, review. Half of this podcast is review. This puts the logos into your mind. Or, okay, maybe that's a poor analogy, because in the Phaedo, we realize that we're not actually putting anything in. We're remembering what's already there, which is another thing to be puzzled about. Make that a question. That's a new quest symbol. You've just been given a new quest. What's the significance of learning being remembering? How many questions can you derive or give birth to from that? So, philomathesis. Now, the next stage is philosophia, philosophy. How does Socrates define philosophy? That's the dialectic. That material that you have had your nose in, been swimming in, hopefully all the time, if this is your highest goal, and if the logos is the understandable paradigm that is the cause of and the creator of the source of all everything else that unfolds into our physical world of becoming, and the creation and maintaining of the principles that our physical laws follow, but not just our physical laws, psychological laws, spiritual laws. Then focusing on the highest aspect that has scope over everything, well, in theory, it might give you what you need to function in the best way in whatever you do. In other words, you can have a single focus on something that applies to all, whatever you're doing. A single focus? That sounds like one of those qualities of meditation. Single focus. Now, the fact that it's the logos, which means it can apply to whatever you do, talking with someone, well, aren't you engaged in talking? Don't you have to judge the person you're talking with? You don't want to be speaking over their head, or you don't want to be babying them. How do you judge where they're at or where they're stuck? How do you judge where they're at? The logos, the outer logos. Hey, maybe they have a problem. How can you understand that problem? That's what we're reading here. Philosophical Midwifery, the art of the logos applied to problems. You can be doing it at all times. Hey, the internal voice that you have, is that reflecting the pathologos or the logos? How do you know? And either one, how would you relate back? Are you going to blindly believe whatever you're told by another person? Or an internal voice that seems to put you down a lot? Or are you going to address it in a fair, artful, great, excellent way? How would you do that? How would you communicate or answer or even understand anything, including your internal voice? Voices. One reflects the logos, one reflects the pathologos. Sometimes we call it the positive and negative daemon. Voice of the logos from self. Well, that's the dialectic. And this dialectic is what Socrates calls the exercise and study of philosophy. So now we've defined philomethesis. Now we have an understanding of what exactly philosophy is. The application of those things we're learning by having our nose in the logos in Socrates, having our nose in the logos of the pathologos in philosophical midwifery, remembering it, talking about it, wondering about it, remembering it. Now all that material we've been remembering, we can organize and structure it in a certain kind of way called the dialectic, which is the structure of thinking. So we're learning to think well. Well, it's not just the structure of thinking, it's the structure of communication. Socrates doesn't just define the dialectic. In fact, he doesn't define the dialectic. He gives us the material for us to define it ourselves. He doesn't give answers. That's what we're reading in the Meno right now. He gives us what we need to answer it ourselves. It wouldn't be much of a quest if the quest giver said, here is your quest to master to figure out the dialectic. And by the way, here is the dialectic. You would accept the quest and you wouldn't have to do anything. You would just click accept and then you would click return quest because he's given you the answer. Wouldn't be much of a journey. You wouldn't have to level up as a person, as a character in the game or in the story. Again, it's an archetype for all heroes' journeys, all adventures, whether it be movies, TV shows, stories, video games. Now, archetype, another word for archetype is the paradigm, the thing over the top that has the scope over everything else. And that's what we're in here. So figuring out the dialectic. Socrates isn't just giving us a definition, what we need for definition, he is demonstrating it as well. So the dialectic is, you could say, is a paradigm, is the structure for good thinking, but it's also the structure for good demonstration of our thinking or communication. How do we talk well? Are we going to use all of these stupid rhetorical tricks? Rhetorical is a fancy word of how do you bullshit people in an argument so you can ruin everyone's day? Really? Oh, but you can walk away with your chest puffed up. I really owned that person I was in a conversation with. I really destroyed him in a debate. No one likes that. And you're a jerk if you act that way. Why? Who wants to be destroyed? How is that benefiting anyone? And These sorts of conversations where people think they're really clever because they know how to confuse people using language doesn't actually help anything, doesn't solve problems, doesn't elevate people, doesn't improve our race, doesn't improve our souls. In anything, it keeps us more entrenched in our problems. Not only do you have the same problems, you walk away with the same problems you walked in with, but now you're more entrenched in them because you're really confident that you defended them. And a lot of people have this frustration when they look at news reports or the right-wing griftosphere. People who talk really fast and they throw in a lot of things and they try and sneak in 10 lies by saying it really quickly, or they realize if they say 10 lies, they can manipulate the more susceptible audiences. But the person talking to them has to spend a lot longer undoing all their lies than the person acting in bad faith is doing by creating them. It's a stupid waste of time. Well, okay, if that's debate, using our understanding, using whatever vision and experience we have of reality, and using our language to do harm, at best distract from doing good. If that's what debate is, which ends up with people more entrenched in their ignorance and picking sides, becoming loyal to their team, more divisions needed for disconnection, disharmony, violence, genocide. What's the opposite of debate? What's the good way of using our highest understanding, our highest vision and experience, and our language? The dialectic. That's what Socrates does. That's what we're learning here. And what we're learning here is the dialectic applied to understanding the problems that we have, understanding how to address them. How do we communicate with that inner voice that keeps our problems alive, keeps us doubting ourselves, keeps us undermining ourselves? The same structure for understanding our problems, pushing the implications of the problems we have here. If I have a problem here and it repeats, what's the implications? That's pushing the implications to discover a question. The implication would be there must be something that has a scope over all of these many examples of these problems. A problem in my relationship, a problem with my reading, a problem with my job, and so on and so on. Pushing the implications to find, well, there must be a cause that has scope, a singular thing over the many. Neat. Well, again, push the implications of that. What does that mean? There must be a cause of this cause. Okay, another way of developing questions that we saw is as above, so below. So let's write it down. Let's put it on the board so we remember. Remembering we said was philomethesis. And a good way of remembering that is philo just means love, philosophia, love or wisdom, and methesis is learning. So a good way of remembering that is you're doing a thesis on your math. It's a mnemonic device. Mnemonic devices help you remember things. So how to generate or give birth new questions. And we'll put in a little quote here, put Gandalf here. It's beard. And he is saying to us, to carry a question is to be on a quest. And we play the quest noise. No, that's the leveling up noise, but that's fine. And we say this. That's Gandalf's voice. Okay, and we put a speech bubble around it. If we can find one that can fit. There we go. There we go. And then we do this. There we go. We've seen push the implications. If this is true, what else follows? Now, those who are familiar with comedy or screenwriting or improv comedy, this is one of the rules. Push the implications. If this is true, what else is true? So like, let's take, for example, improv. If somebody makes a statement, like you start a new scene, someone says, oh, ice cream salesman, I would like a vanilla cone. Okay, they're setting the scene. The golden rule is you don't say no. I'm not an ice cream salesman. You're an idiot. That might get a cheap laugh, but now the scene is dead. So that's why the golden rule is you saying yes and. Yes and. The and part is, so the yes is don't just reject it. And okay, so we've seen that. The dialectic isn't just rejecting people. You don't have my opinion, so I'm going to kill you or genocide you or exclude you or stop the conversation. All of these sorts of things. No, understanding is inclusive. We're all here for a reason. Everyone with the ability to have language and self-reflection can play the game. In fact, that's why we're here. So there's the yes, but the and is, if this is true, then what else would follow? So a good improv comedian wouldn't just say, yes, I am an ice cream salesman, and here is your cone. Well, what else is true? If this is true, what else is true? If you're an ice cream salesman, maybe you're in the park, and you can make a comment about, I don't know, animals in the park, or noisy children, or greedy children trying to steal your ice cream or something. You develop the scene by saying, if this is true, what follows? That's pushing the implication. Same thing with screenwriting. An example of that is, you might have seen this. There's a clip that was being shared by the algorithm of on YouTube of Matt Stone and Trey Parker, the amazingly talented writers of South Park and many other things, Book of Mormon, and they said very simply, when you're writing and you are creating a scenes, make sure the transition point between scenes isn't this happened, then this happened, then this happened. That's bad writing. So what you do instead is, instead of saying that, this happened and therefore this happened. So if this is true, what would follow? You might say, but this happened and therefore that happened. Very simple principle. If this is true, what follows? And that's what we see in the dialectic as well, because every stage of the dialectic rolls over. You have the definition, but then you take that definition, which is self to itself. You start with the subject, and now you've got it defined. The subject itself. This defined subject then rolls over to the demonstration. How does this thing roll over and function to another? Now, the division is these others that we have just understood have been affected by this thing, which was this thing. How does these others having been affected then relate to other others? Notice how it all rolls over. If this, then what? Or if this and therefore what? Pushing the implications. So that was one thing we've talked about. How do we generate new questions? And an example that we were using now. Oh, I have noticed that I have a repeating problem that keeps coming up in many areas. What's the implication? What does that mean? Well, that would mean that tomorrow it might happen again. But when? How can I anticipate it happening again? Well, what's the same about all of these? I have a problem at whenever I apply for a promotion at work, whenever I talk to the girl I have a crush on, whenever I read something I'm really, really interested in. But not when I'm just sitting on the couch watching TV. Not when I'm going for a walk. So what is a unifying characteristic? What's the same? Look for a unifying theme. Or idea. Let's move Gandalf over to the side a little bit. Dun, 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 dun. So that's one of the ways we can generate a question. What's the unifying idea? What will that mean? That means that next, all of the experiences you have in your life, you can have a unified focus and wonder on this question. Ooh, am I free to pursue this activity with the highest excellence? Am I free to use my highest understanding? Am I free to reference my highest vision of self and reality? My highest vision of my highest goals? Am I free to use my highest use of language to communicate it? Or is there a block? Do I feel like I have to play dumb to my highest visions? Pretend I'm dumber than I am? Do I have to sabotage my highest understanding because that's arrogant or patronizing to just explain my highest understanding? Oh, that's the cause. Forget about the cause. Let's just say, am I undermining my understanding? Am I undermining my language? Do I use big words unnecessarily or dumb words unnecessarily? In other words, am I blocked? In which case, can I wonder what's the same about the situations where I'm blocked and contrast it with the situations where I'm free? Is there a unifying idea that causes one and the other? So we can say that is going from many to one. That's a fantastic way of generating a new question. Fundamental to philosophy. In fact, this is the way into philosophy. You might notice many beautiful things, but then philosophy isn't about the physical things, the expressions of it, or the adjectives of beauty. A beautiful dog, a beautiful person, a beautiful painting. This is beauty used in an adjective, but what is the one? What is the noun that causes the adjectives? What's the one that causes the many? That's philosophy, because if there is a cause or a noun, it has to have an existence independent or outside of the physical world. That's the realm of being. That's our focus in philosophy. What is the eternal, immortal realm of being in which all things have their eternal, immortal existence that is knowable to even aliens, even Jews and Palestinians, even Protestants and Christians, even black and white people, even people 1 million years ago and 1 million years in the future, on different planets, in different galaxies. Therefore, we call it truth, with a capital T, or self-truth. Hey, which means we not only can we use philosophy, they're going from the many to the one, to put an end to conflict between human groups, black and white people, Jews and Palestinians, Catholics and Protestants, and so on and so on. But we could anticipate conflicts with alien species and know what the cause would be, a rejection of that, and relate more rationally, maturely, and harmoniously with alien species. See? Or future species if a time machine is invented. Isn't that neat? So, going from the many to the one, the essence of philosophy. So that's what we are wondering about. What's the one behind this? Now, one way of going from many to the one is, what is its cause? So another way of developing a question is, hang on a second, I've noticed that I have this problem coming up. What's the implications of that? It'll happen tomorrow. When? Oh, unifying idea. It seems like whenever I approach something super meaningful, my problem comes out. So what's the implications? If I pursue something meaningful tomorrow, I'm going to be in the same situation. Another pushing of the implication is, hang on a second, if there's a many here, there might be a one, a central problem that all of these are just expressions of. Or you could say that's a cause. These are all ways of developing questions. Now this is a necessary first step, because then we can take that question and go into philomathesis. Let's write it on the board. Philomathesis. What's philomathesis? Repetition, review, talking about. Mathesis. Love of learning. Remembering, repeating, reviewing. Now, that moves into philosophia. And what's the exercise of philosophy? Different color. Philosophia, which we call philosophy. The art of, no, it's the exercise, just to use a direct quote, EXER, size, study of dialectic. That's a direct quote from the Phaedo, but also it's the final study in the Republic. A study, what does a philosopher king, someone who has the best kind of mastership over his own soul, over his own self, not a tyrant, not an oligarch chasing money, not a timocratic ruler of your own soul, chasing fame, wanting to get the most likes on Instagram, but a philosopher king. What's the exercise and study of that? Needed for the training of the philosopher king? Culminates in the dialectic. That's book 7 of the Republic. So what does that mean? That means all of these questions start us on the track to, then we can use that question to look for pieces, parts. Look for parts. Remember the parts. Repeat the parts. And then those parts have to be organized into a whole. Parts into a whole. We talked about that last time. Rising to a greater level of wholes. So how do we take those parts and see how they are parts in a greater whole? That's the dialectic. That's the way of organizing. It's the organizing principle of the Logos that will allow us to organize what we have discovered. And we've only discovered because we've been curious. And we've only been curious because we're carrying a question, putting us on a quest. And we've only developed a question to put us on a quest by playing one of these games, being a good improv comedian of life. Which is funny because a lot of courses that teach improv comedians say, hey, you might not be the next Colin Mockery, but you can use the techniques and skills that you learn through improv comedians from your study in this course to have better relationships, to talk with your co-workers better at work, and so on and so on. In other words, they recognize that there is some benefit to learning the improv comedy rules and practicing it and exercising it, as well as learning it, studying exercise. But we are understanding why. So the dialectic is the organization of those parts into a greater whole, which gives you understanding. Last time we talked about how one way of understanding the spiritual quest is a movement into higher levels of wholes, be it levels of reality. We talked about the physical world today as being caused by the world of being. Meaning there is a greater whole of which our physical universe is merely a part. And where's my mouse? That's ontology, which is the fancy word for the study of what exists. Because the word ontos means being. What is being? What bees in the world? Ontos. And ology is just a fancy word for study, a fancy part of a word. So it also is epistemology. Epistos is, again, the Greek word for knowledge. How do we know? If ontology is what is, well, how do we know them? For example, one level of ontology is our physical world. That's something that exists in some kind of a way. How do we know it? Beliefs and opinions. Why? Because you can't go from many to the one, or a principle, if your thinking is limited to only the physical world. You don't see principles in the physical world. So if you've ever known of cultures, like right now, who are non-philosophers and they don't spend their time studying the realm of being, they don't have any principles. So, for example, again, the Israelis, genocide is bad, except when we do it. That's not a principle. That's just an opinion, a personal belief. And the cause of problems like genocides. Okay, we don't have to do that. If we go from the physical world to the realm of being, where principles is, that's philosophy. Oh, but that's going to cause blocks because you're going to be challenging your Jewish upbringing, as an example. Anyone, Catholic upbringing, American upbringing, Irish upbringing, whatever it is. Okay, tradition. Traditionally, we weren't smart. And let's stay loyal to our tradition. That's the path of Logos. Loyal to our ignorance. Okay, so where do beliefs and opinions lie? Beliefs and opinions are an epistemology, a way of thinking, applied right down the bottom to the physical world. Okay, but what are we doing right now? This literally right now, what are we doing? We are using a principle, the dialectic, the Logos, to understand the physical world. That's understanding. But the wonderful thing about understanding is understanding can be used to understand the problems caused by beliefs. And we have that great quote from Einstein, I think, you can't solve a problem by the same way of thinking that caused it. And we're going to upgrade it into we're going to add the Logos into that quote. You can't understand or solve a problem caused by the same cognitive function or epistemology that created the problem. In other words, you can't belief your way out of problems caused by belief. You have to rise to a greater level of wholes that allow you to have a mastership or art that can solve the problems caused by the lower level. You can't belief your way out of problems caused by belief, which is the solution offered by these people. Hey, if we kill all the Palestinians, there'll just be our Jewish belief left. So because we don't like those Muslim beliefs, so we're going to out-belief them. Doesn't work. It's stupid. It's stupid, but it's the height of what they're dealing with. That's the level of cognitive function that they have learned. Why? Because they haven't learned philosophy. One reason is, well, what do we do with what Socrates showed us? We killed Socrates. But his student Plato picked up and started the academy, not quite at the level of Socrates, but still all right. But what happened then? The Romans invaded, set up, wanted to kill philosophy, wanted to kill these things, and said, let's create a Christian religion based on belief. And they murdered the philosophers. And if you even if you wanted to understand your own Bible, if you had a Bible written in your language that you could read, you'd be murdered. Why? Because they were brutes. That's our tradition. So if we are in a world that is from that Roman or Latin tradition, that's modern philosophy. Limited here. That's why if you learn philosophy at university, you learn Kant's belief and Hegel's belief and Nietzsche's belief and a really, really poor idea of Socrates, a straw man. Why? Isn't that a waste of money? Yeah, it is. But the reason why is because that's the level that they're at. Same thing applies to psychotherapy. because it's a relatively new discipline. It's an eclectic tradition. It doesn't have a model, because model is here and here and here. That's what we're learning in the Logos and Dialectic. So you can be a psychotherapist and say, I like Carl Rogers' belief. I like this belief from this tradition. And who cares? There's no principle that says whether or not that's actually psychotherapy, or if you're just bullshitting your clients to make money or to feel superior, or just because you don't know. Now, sometimes we get people interested in this channel who are from that tradition, and that can be a bitter pill to swallow. Oh, but ask yourself, okay, it can be hard to reflect on your own self, especially if you spent your life studying this and a lot of money studying this, and your identity is tied to it. But look at your co-workers, look at people in your field. Do you know someone who's also a psychotherapist, who has different beliefs from you that you think are stupid or harmful, but nevertheless he's called a psychotherapist and can practice and charge money? Why do you think that's allowed? Would that be allowed in medicine? No, because there's a paradigm for healthy body in medicine that you have to learn. And that's what we're learning here. That's philosophical midwifery. The Logos and the Dialectic would be the paradigm needed to be introduced to philosophy and governance and philosophy and so on and so on. It's the paradigm of paradigms. So the fact that understanding is also not just a way of, so this is midwifery, understanding, which is, okay, I need to get a new mouse. I keep telling myself that. Understanding, which is what's philosophy, the dialectic. Understanding the problems of beliefs. That's this channel, that's this series. So this is a good way of understanding what we're doing in this series here of philosophical midwifery. Using understanding, using the paradigm of the Logos and the Dialectic to understand beliefs and the problems caused by them, to free ourselves from them. Philosophy is understanding applied to not just the world of beliefs in our physical world, but being. Because being is in nous. Nous is knowledge, but it's something that you can actually know. So the famous quote, we talked about one of the ways that philosophy is abused, not taught properly, is when you're learning Kant's and Hegel's beliefs, you get given some other crappy beliefs about Socrates. Now, one reason is we haven't had a translation. All of the translations have been written by translators who've had pathologos beliefs that have influenced how poorly they translate the text. Literally, if you look at the way that, well, we do this on our channel, when we read the Balboa translation with the actual ancient Greek, we can compare it to the translations that we formerly had. And what's really curious is all of the translations of the keywords that are about dianoia, understanding being, that are about nous and being, that's about phronesis, all of these levels that actually are about philosophy, being, they're not there. Our translator is stuck here. It's almost as though the translators haven't been doing it themselves. I mean, that is why the Juan Balboa has been doing philosophy for a long time, practicing what he preaches or demonstrating what he's been defining. Including he's been doing philosophical midwifery. So he's been addressing the false beliefs that might cause misinterpretations of the text, developing a clearer way of seeing, getting rid of the bad beliefs, and a clearer way of understanding, allowing him to give a more accurate definition, a more accurate translation of the text. And he's included the ancient Greek. So whenever we think, oh, maybe this one is influenced by a level of his false beliefs, or limited by his level of understanding, doesn't matter. We can read it for ourselves. Especially, hey, even if he gets it right, we can still look up a keyword for ourselves. So that's That's the game. So why is there genocides and war and conflict and all of the news networks? No one's doing actual journalism. No one's structuring their arguments in a structured way. Why do we allow politicians and scammers to jump from topic to topic? Why are they allowed to use arguments that are obviously bad, like the Gish Gallop, saying 10 false things really quickly before giving the interviewer a chance to correct them? Or there are many false equivalencies. Like right now, the Palestinians are fighting, so they're equivalent to the Israelis, who have imprisoned them in the largest open-air prison for many years and are torturing them and are shooting them and are killing them all, have trillions of dollars and weapons. The prisoners who are being genocided, they are equivalent. Hey, so it's a war. It's not a genocide, it's a war. They're the same. False equivalence. Okay, another one I heard, a fantastic channel that does fantastic reporting on this is, as I've been saying, if you're on Twitch, Denims is the Twitch streamer who is amazing and brilliant, and she helps make clear all of these poor uses of language and argumentation to justify terrible things that are happening, particularly right now, the genocide happening to the Palestinian people. So I thoroughly recommend her channel. She's the best. And one of the ones that came up yesterday at the time of recording was the perfect prisoner argument, I think it's called. So if the Israelis are starving and torturing and exploding and murdering the Palestinians who don't have any resources, who are being genocided, who their whole world is occupied by very rich Israeli military forces, the way that they rebel against their oppression has to be perfect. They can't ever kill a civilian of their team. In other words, I've got my boot on your throat and I'm crushing the life out of you. Now, the way you get my boot off your throat has to be perfectly moral. You have to do it in the most perfect Socrates-like way. Otherwise, you're bad. Okay? The perfect prisoner fallacy. This is bullshit. And it's a distraction. So, again, as Denims helps point out, whenever somebody's saying, hey, maybe we shouldn't be murdering all these innocent children, the first thing the people who are wanting to use language in a terrible, unjust way to distract or confuse understanding, the first thing they will say is, but do you condemn Hamas? Which is the false equivalency. Someone doing a genocide is not the same as people who have been enslaved and impoverished and exploited and abused for many generations, many years, doing their best in whatever way to fight back without even asking the question of whether or not this inciting event was created or at least allowed to justify. They call that a false flag or a problem reaction solution. Putting aside that, and obviously most invasions have an inciting element that was created or at least allowed by the invading force. So to be like, you really wanted to yell at your friend, you hand them a glass of juice, but you've covered the glass in baby oil, so it immediately falls out of their hand. Oh, you dropped my glass. You are... And you start yelling at them, which was the thing you wanted to begin with. You created the conditions for the reaction on purpose to justify what you wanted to do. So obviously, if you look at the situation in Palestine, they created the conditions for people trying to fight back and defend their existence, defend themselves. And then they use the perfect prisoner. Well, you didn't defend yourself against our tyranny in the most angelic way, so we get to do whatever we want to you. Again, all of these are poor uses of our language, poor uses of our understanding, and poor uses of our vision. Those are the three that we're dealing with today. Our highest. Now, when we look at the logos, you can understand the ladder of the logos. On one side is our experience, or our highest vision. What's been your highest vision of reality? What's been your highest experience of self and reality? The other rail is these. Rails are the two upward parts of the ladder, and the rungs are the horizontal parts. Your highest understanding, that's the ladder of the logos. So it looks like a ladder. And so we're looking for blocks to that. But also we could say, together, we use both together for our language. Let's put it somewhere else. And both together is our move it down. Move it. This is the language, this is the logos. Move it. Move it up. Zoom in. Logos. Ladder. And both of those together we use for our language or communication and art. How artfully do we function? Artful functioning. For example, if you're one of those people who uses, who pretends to ignore their experiences and visions of the Holocaust, of the genocide, or they try and obfuscate, they try and muddy the waters that prevents understanding by using their language in a negative way, how are they functioning? Are they functioning artfully to benefit, or are they functioning to in a way that's loyal to their ignorance or pocketbooks, if they're getting paid to do this, to harm people, to justify harm or create more harm? So we want to use language, communication, and artful functioning using both our highest experience or visions, including especially experiences of being, non-physical ones, yoga, meditation, out-of-body experiences, our highest understanding, specifically an understanding of that, with our language in a certain way. Now, dialectic is the ladder of understanding. Dialectic is a way of understanding our highest vision. Dialectic is the way of communicating in a non-debate or not jerkish way. So, dialectic, the paradigm of all paradigms, needed for all of it. Isn't that interesting? Equally so, having this basic model will allow you to recognize blocks. Where are you acting less than artfully? Where are you communicating in a way of When are you not communicating? When are you not speaking up? Or when are you speaking up in a way with all these false equivalencies or gish gallops? When are you using big words to exclude people? Or when are you using too simple language to appeal to ignorance? When are you not using your highest understanding? When are you playing dumb? When are you ignoring your most profound spiritual experiences? You meet up for coffee with a friend. It's like our one joke on the channel. It's not even a joke. I say coffee, so I have a sip of coffee. It's not a joke. It's an excuse for me to have coffee. But when they say, hey, let's talk about Tom Cruise, and you've had an experience or vision of reality itself, or an out-of-body experience, or an astral traveling experience, or even a profound insight. Doesn't even have to be out of body. You've had a profound realization about something, maybe by reading philosophy, doing this channel. When do you ignore that to talk about Tom Cruise? Or the latest Mr. Beast drama? So these are, using this simple model is a way of surfacing blocks. Now, of course, we need to climb the ladder as much as we can, because the further you go up the ladder, the more profound or the more fundamental the block will be surfaced. Or maybe it's the same block. That's one of the questions. Is it, do we just have one pathologos, or is it many? If it's just one, I'm not answering that question, I'm wondering about it. If it's just one, then climbing this ladder is needed to get to the depth of the same question. Just like, okay, so we have to be climbing this ladder not only to improve our vision of self and reality, prove our understanding, prove our way of being, that's philosophy, but also to surface the blocks needed to do midwifery on to free ourselves from our problems. So that's the ladder we're climbing. And also gives us a way of seeing, oh, I'm at a block. I'm not doing this, I'm not doing this, I'm not doing any of these. I must be blocked on this rung of the ladder. For example, maybe I think that I'm not a nihilist right at the bottom. Nihilist is someone who says there's nothing. It's all the matrix, nothing is real. Maybe I don't believe that, but I think that everything is relative to personal opinions. There's no actual truth. Relativism. Maybe as soon as I'm being encouraged to move from relativism to find true principles, which is what we're doing here, which is what is understanding, the experience of that is what we're after as well. Maybe I don't like that, because that would mean that my beloved Aunt Mary, who has all these terrible opinions, is not so beautiful and wise after all. But I love her. I don't want to admit that some opinions are stupid and understanding is actually true. That's my block. So you have to do midwifery to remove the block so you can actually learn the truth. Learn the true principles and go on. So, handy model to have. Okay, so all of this has been a reflection on rising to a greater level of wholes. So wherever you find yourself, oh, I'm noticing some things here. One way of developing a question is, well, what's the whole that these parts are a part of? That can be a question. And by the way, that's insight. Oh, I was really confused about how these mathematical things fit together. But then I suddenly saw how that they were all parts in a greater whole, and I saw the whole, now I understand it. Okay, that's a metaphor. Metaphor is another way of developing questions. So everything that we are seeing here, we can apply to midwifery, using understanding to address our false beliefs, this guy here. But also we can develop a new question. If we gain an insight in our reading, how do we gain a new question? Well, how does it apply metaphorically to philosophy? The understanding applied to being. So a good word for what we're doing is philodianoia, because dianoia is the greater level of wholes that will allow us to solve problems of our beliefs, be they political ones or, more importantly, our own false beliefs about ourselves and reality that cause our problems. But also, whatever you learn in mastering midwifery, you can ask, how could that apply as a metaphor to going up the ladder to philosophy? Congratulations, you have given yourself a new question and a new quest. So we can add that to our list of ways of, I promise I will have a new mouse soon and I'll be able to move around the board better. Get stuck sometimes. So how do we generate or give birth to new questions? Push implications. You find what's the unifying theme or idea? How do we go from a many to the one? What's the cause? How do we move from parts to a whole? By the way, dialectic is a good way of doing that. In fact, dialectic is, I've just blown the punchline. You could use the dialectic for all of these. Metaphor. Metaphor. What I see in one system, how can I apply it to another system? What I see in midwifery, how do I apply it to philosophy? So that's a sort of a sideways movement, because philosophical midwifery is a partner with philosophy. You got to be doing both, otherwise you're not doing spirituality really, or philosophy. That might conflict with some people's personal beliefs. But if I didn't say it, could that have been a block? Would I be playing dumb to our true understanding that we've been developing and my own true experiences and the Logos itself by pretending that anyone's spiritual tradition, even if it involves sacrificing goats and harming women, is still spirituality? Is that the right thing to do? But it would harm the goats and the women, so it's not actually beneficial or good. But it feels like in our culture, it's bad to say that, even though it would stop harm and free people up if they're able to let go of that terrible belief system. It would free them up for their own development. But it's still going to conflict with people who grew up in that made up religion I just made up, or that made up cult. So they'll say, hey, don't be mean. Don't have a chip on your shoulder. Or don't poo-poo our tradition. Why? Why are you trying to get me, guilt me, or I don't know, use some sort of technique, appeal to politeness to get me to lie, to be blocked from my highest vision or understanding or use of language? That's what we were talking about. A loyalty to beliefs. That loyalty might be keeping you stuck in your problem or preventing you from going up even further. So, easy to say to other people. I don't mean to be mean. I recognize. This is the story of Achilles. Achilles is, in the Iliad, is a story of someone who had a false belief of this nature, and he was a terrible jerk, really, really powerful bad guy, not a bad guy, acting in an unjust way, but he discovered the process of midwifery, developed a question about his behavior, went from the many examples to the one, found a cause of his terrible behavior, and applied philosophical midwifery to free himself from it. Now, one of the things about Achilles is everybody else could see his problem. That's the game. You can't see your own blind spots. So it's very easy to point to other religions or other cultures or other cults, but the one that you grew up in, that's the one you're going to be blind to and want to defend. So keep that in mind. Reflect on how you're functioning and see if you can surface a block. Am I trying to block people's understanding by saying, hey, don't be rude to my tradition? I like abusing women. Makes me feel like a big alpha man. How am I functioning? Am I wanting to block his understanding? Now, one quality that we have is projection. Often we will attack other people in the same way that we attack ourselves. Am I blocked from my understanding? Do I know enough about the world to realize that the beloved beliefs I grew up in are actually bullshit, but I don't want to let go of them because I am being polite? Am I demanding the same kind of politeness and using the word politeness to demand the same kind of ignorance I am doing to myself? That's ousia. Ousia is the ability to, let's move metaphor down. So another way of developing questions, ousia. Ousia is a special word that we have to use the Greek for because we don't have it in English. It's the self to turn back. Let's move metaphor down a little bit more. Turn back around. How many R's in around? Upon oneself. When you're angry at other people, or you're attacking other people, or you're demanding ignorance from other people, or using bad communication to confuse other people, turn it around and we'll ask, hang on a second, am I projecting? If that's the case, what am I doing to myself to demand the same sort of ignorance? That's ousia, to turn back around upon oneself. Now, we see the word self right there, self. What does that mean? That means there's a possibility for this having a meaning that is in all of the levels, because one of the one of the questions we have is, one of the ways that we can generate a question is, what has the scope over all others or other levels? What does that mean? Well, related to causes. If there is something causing beauty itself, it would have the scope over by being causal of all other beautiful things. And using metaphor, what is that? How can we apply it to midwifery? If we have a false belief about ourselves, that will have a influence or scope over all of our actions, all of our ways of being, our mask, our persona, our way of talking to people, and our problems. It could be causal. One of the reasons you can have a scope is its cause. So you could say, well, okay, we have a problem. Everybody's lunch keeps getting missing at work, keeps going missing at work. What has a scope over all of those incidents? Every time Bill is at work, it happens, which is also a way of finding a cause. So we have levels of ontology, our physical world, understanding, which can go down or up, down in midwifery, up in philosophy, the realm of being. That's the thing that we can actually experience and know. That's nous. So, going back, one of those poor arguments is a straw man argument. One of the straw man arguments given about philosophy and Socrates is a certain quote. to prevent this, to keep students at the level of beliefs. One of that quote is, Socrates said, maybe you've seen this before, "I am wisest because I know nothing." Now you might think of that, so hang on a second, there's a contradiction in there. How can you know nothing? Isn't that a kind of knowing? Oh yes, they will say. That means that he is so stupid he doesn't even know his own contradiction. Or you're not translating him properly. That's a lie. A straw man argument. Straw man means to create a bad argument made out of straw that can be easily knocked over. So therefore Socrates is a dope. Or, hey, if even Socrates says there's no such thing as knowledge, then there's no reason to go above belief. And all of these realms are off the table. Of course, that's not the quote. That's a rhetorical use of language that creates blocks and unjust actions, not beneficial actions. What's the actual quote? "I am wiser than the others in Athens because I don't think I know something I don't know. I don't confuse actual knowledge, which is here in the realm of being, with any of this garbage that other people claim to be knowing. I know this, but isn't that just your belief? Yes, but isn't that all knowing is? No." And so if you take that understanding and find it for yourself, read it in the ancient Greek, take that with your reading into the Platonic dialogues. How many of Socrates' dialogues, conversations, are with people who are mistaking belief for knowledge? So if Socrates actually does know what nous is, there are several things he actually does claim to know in the texts, then does that make sense? I am wiser because I'm not mistaking this on this epistemological level. I'm not mistaking this epistemology, this cognitive function of knowing, for things that apply to the realm of ontology, the physical world. I don't think you can know things in the physical world because epistemology has levels as ontology does. The level of existence or ontology of the physical world is the realm of belief and understanding if you do it, if you apply the dialectic. Whereas the people I talk to think this physical world is where knowledge is. It ain't. So, one of the things that has scope, so you say being has scope over the physical world, which is why we can use the dianoia of being and discover the logos and dialectic which exists in being and use it for everything. You can use it to learn music, you can use it to make good stories, as we've been talking about. You can use it to solve the problems of your beliefs in midwifery. Why? Because this has a scope over everything else. Now, what's really curious is the self is at the top. So nous and phronesis and whatever this level is, that's a mystery that we're still on the hunt for, one of our quests in our reading. The self has a scope over all of it. It's the first and final cause, the self. Which would mean that the self, if this is the divine, if this is God, the immortal, eternal creator of our physical world, then the self is more primary, more causal, more metaphysically primary, and has a greater scope than even God. Again, I know that people who have been taught beliefs that they stink, they're a sinner, their self is bad, and God is fantastic, and therefore do what we say, because we are closer to God because we wear the funny robes, and we're the only ones who are allowed to read the book, until recently. When they hear, what? Your self is actually more primary and more metaphysically higher with a greater scope and even better and more profound than God? Okay, obviously then they're false beliefs about God, because there are a million terrible beliefs about God, and that's why we try not to use the word. It's so loaded with all these terrible beliefs. Throw a stone, you'll find someone with a different and wild belief about God. Read the Bible, read any of the Abrahamic religions books. terrible beliefs about God. So we try not to use the word, so we use the word divine, which is the realm of nous, the immortal nature of being. So discovering, again, don't just believe me, keep this as a question and see if it is true as we read philosophy. You won't be able to see it if you're not also doing midwifery, because that will block you from your seeing. It will cause you to project your beliefs onto the text to prevent understanding, keeping you stuck at this level of the ladder. There's our ladder. So, point out, hey, by the way, you're not an evil sinner. Oh, yes, I am. No, you're not. And by the way, you're greater than even the divine. Greater than God? How dare you? Blasphemy. Burn him, burn him, burn him. By the way, that belief is causing you to function in a terrible way by burning a human being. But I have to burn you because you have a belief that's different from my beliefs. And my beliefs are good and your beliefs are bad. By the way, does hurting people address the cause of belief? No, it doesn't. That's the debate. I'm winning. I'm going to own you or destroy you in a debate. Well, I'm going to destroy you physically. That's the genocide. You don't help remove beliefs by inflicting suffering and violence. So you are blocked from your understanding or your experience, causing you to function in an unartful way. You've got to block. So anyone who says, how dare you conflict with my belief, obviously they have a unjust way of functioning, a non-beneficial, non-artful way of functioning. That's a block. Not because it's a belief, because we are having an understanding of the paradigm. And this paradigm that we're understanding is directly verifiable by you. You don't have to believe the guys with the funny, well, I spoke to God and he said this. Wow, you're a prophet, or you're the chosen one, or you're the incarnation of God, you're Jesus, or you're Muhammad, or you're the cult leader who spoke directly to God, Joseph Smith or whoever. Okay, nonsense. That's saying you can't have nous, so just believe me. Bollocks. That's called bullshittery. It's a lie. Okay, we call them grifters if they know they're lying, or we call them true believers if they're lying, but they're actually so stuck in their own belief without any self-reflection, they believe they're nonsense. I think the majority have an awareness. They know what they're doing, they don't know why they're doing. That's a handy principle. Nevertheless, we are understanding the ladder, understanding the paradigm, and we can directly confirm it in the experience of nous, which means it's knowable. So again, if you understand something, do you have to believe anyone else? By the way, not only if you've understood it, but experience it directly, do you have to believe anyone else? If you've integrated into your way of function because you recognize that you have discovered a more true nature of your own self and being, so that not only is it an understanding and knowledge that you can use, but it's you, and you recognized it's you. It's become you, or you've rediscovered your higher self. Do you need to believe what anyone else tells you about your higher self if you have discovered and you are living it because you've reached that level? And by the way, if there's a stage even above phronesis, same questions apply. So really handy to be aware of this. So that's scope. The higher ontological and epistemological things have a greater scope over the others, which is why when you are a doctor, you use your, okay, again, it's a metaphor into the physical world. Use your medical knowledge of the perfect body and your medical understanding of how the parts fit together into the greater whole of that perfect body. You use that, you focus on that when a new patient comes into your office. Any doctor who is at the level of belief is just going to look for things that resembled the belief he already has. Well, I believe that if someone has a broken arm, you put the cast here. What if someone doesn't have a broken arm? He's screwed. You have to match his belief. By the way, this is one of the reasons why we have all this projection. why the Israeli people or the Zionist people are projecting their own problems onto the others. They don't have understanding. They only have their beliefs. That's what Judaism is. It's bound by a Jewish belief. By definition. So what does that mean? Well, it's the saying, once you're a hammer, the whole world becomes a nail. If all you can do is belief, then you have to make everyone fit into the very narrow scope of your beliefs, because that's the only thing you've learned how to address. If you become a doctor and let's use a mechanic. If you're a mechanic and you've only ever fixed spark plugs, you don't know why you fix a spark plug a certain way, because the person you're apprentice under, your master, your mechanic master, has said, oh, just believe me. Then whenever a car comes in, if it's not a broken spark plug, and if it's not broken in the certain way that you've only been doing, then you can't do anything. You can't function as a mechanic. But if you want to pretend to be a mechanic, then you are going to take any problem of the car. I think this is a problem of the spark plug. Why? Because that's all you can do. You either have to recognize and admit you don't know what you claim to know as a mechanic, or you try and make everything a spark plug problem. That's the difficulty. One of the fundamental causes of the difficulty in trying to reason with those who are under the beliefs that justify the Palestinian genocide. They don't have understanding. They only have certain beliefs. And their beliefs are to do with, obviously, tradition. So some terrible beliefs, some really monstrous beliefs in the Abrahamic religions, but also their experiences of having been genocided against. So they are projecting the thing that they have beliefs about onto the Palestinians. They're doing the genocide now. And all they can do is project the beliefs that they have onto the Palestinians and call them evil or barbarians or less than human, the exact same thing that was done to them by the Nazis. When you're a hammer, everything is a nail. Because that's all they have. Now, what's the option? The option is to realize you don't actually know what you claim to know. You are not a mechanic. You are not a true political leader who has understanding of the nature of the human spirit, the human psyche, the levels of ontology and epistemology. Oops. You don't actually have understanding of epistemology and ontology. You don't actually have nous of it. You don't have the integration and phronesis, and you don't have this higher level. You don't have any of that. In other words, you're not a knower, because knowing is here. You shouldn't be in charge. You shouldn't have rulership over people. You shouldn't control an army. That's the just way of responding, when you recognize you only have belief and you are treating everyone like a nail because that's the only things you have beliefs about. You're a hammer. But what happens if your ego, your identity, your position in government, your identity within your religion, your self-identity, your mask is all tied to playing the role of the knower? That's what we're learning here. The urge to be a knower through imitation of belief is stronger than our desire for actual artful functioning, for actual personal development, to actually be a qualified mechanic. So if you say, hey, Netanyahu or Biden or anyone, you shouldn't be in charge. You don't have knowledge. You don't have an art. You can't demonstrate you have a knowing vision of the ideal of humanity. You don't have an understanding of it, and you don't have, that's dianoia, and you don't have an understanding of what causes human problems. So you can't function as a mechanic to create an ideal car or fix a broken car. You are not a knower. what will they say? They will say, go to hell, and they will shoot you. If they can get away with it. And then they'll justify it. So, but you're a heathen. You threatened that, whatever, my personal belief. This is the difficulty. Are we willing to sacrifice our ignorance and our identity with claiming to know things we don't? That's Socrates' quote. I am wiser than all of these other dirtbags. He didn't say dirtbags. I am wiser than all of these other people because I don't claim to know things that are unknowable. I don't walk around calling myself a knower. That's the issue. It could be a TV reporter who thinks they know about politics. It could be a philosophy teacher who thinks they know about philosophy. It could be a political leader who thinks they know about justice. All of these people are the people Socrates talked to in his dialogues. People who claim to know that which is not only they don't know, they are mistaking their beliefs for knowledge. But if you have an awareness of knowledge and an understanding of knowledge, that gives you the scope to be able to deal with everyone's beliefs. So whether it's a genocidal Israeli belief, whether it's a belief that capitalism is good, whether it's a belief that white supremacy is good, whether it's a belief that subjugating women is good, whether it's belief that belief is good, all of these beliefs, you don't have to have beliefs about. You can bring your understanding and knowledge to say, oh, this is your issue. Like a doctor, I have a knowledge of the ideal body and an understanding of how the parts fit together into a whole. So any sick person who comes into my office, I'll be able to address with the ideal art of medicine. I'm not saying that every doctor is that, but that's the standard. That's the ideal. So what? That's needed for problems. Meaning, if we were to set up a just society, if we were to be a just ruler, we would create the social conditions, the institutions where every day at school we're doing midwifery, learning to understand problems caused by belief. And then the second half of the day we're doing dianoia, learning understanding of the true principles that are universal for everyone. In other words, no one gets to do a genocide because it's universally bad. Which is also the preparation for our direct confirmation in it. And then, okay, the third part of the day, we'll use it. We'll have dialectics with our friends. We'll do midwifery with our friends as well. We'll play football using the dialectic. We'll write music using the dialectic. So any good ruler would create the social conditions for exactly that. Why? Because it's true. Eternally. Even if you're an alien species, it's still going to be true. But to do that, you have to be willing to sacrifice your false beliefs that you know shit you don't know, which requires a level of integrity, courage, or the social conditions, the social structures and institutions that makes it obvious. If everyone walks around saying, oh, beliefs are just as good as knowledge, then it can be hard to say, well, really? Then I can just pretend I'm a guru because I have a dumb belief that I really like? Wow. I like feeling this way about myself. And if I can trick people as a grifter, I can get followers and I can get them to do stuff for me. Wow. But if we have a society that realizes, oh no, if you are claiming to be a profession, you are claiming to function in a certain way. If you are claiming to function, you should show that you have nous and understanding, and you can demonstrate it. The same thing we do for pilots or mechanics or doctors. In other words, we are waking up to becoming mature and rational about ourselves and how we treat ourselves and our planet, which is one of the questions that we have picked up as we've been reading this text. One of the questions is from the text. Let's find it. Mature. Okay. Irrational. Let's use this word. Okay. Questions. Okay. It's hard to find the word search with a scanned document. But I think off stream, I'll make a list of quotes so that we can bring it up. Because this is a big one. It's a fundamental one. Obviously, the whole chapter, it is entirely possible to verify for ourselves, nous, that we are part of a caring and intelligible. Intelligible means dianoia, understanding, and nous, knowledge. And the verification is a kind of proof, since it's a way of understanding. That's what we're learning. And so on and so on. Fantastic. Quote there, we should put into a quote. But there was a big question. Why are we so irrational towards ourselves? Maybe it was in the previous chapter. I think it was. All right, so that's the question that we've been carrying. Why can we be so rational and mature towards other things like mechanics? Who gets to be a mechanic? Who gets to be a dentist? But we are acting so immature and irrationally towards our own selves. And that's what we've been addressing. One of them is a lack of awareness of that ladder of the logos, epistemology and ontology, but also the lack of openness to actually learning that, which is an allegiance to a belief of knowing based on imitation, making the whole world nails because all you know is how to imitate a hammer. And so we want to understand why. And last time we talked about how one of the causes that has the scope that causes all people, doesn't matter if you're Hitler or Netanyahu or even Uncle Bob, who claims to know about how the Cowboys should run their offense. He thinks he's knowing because he imitates a certain way of being. And here we go. Imitating, becoming like our model, striving to be accepted as someone or something. All that is guided by an urge to become like what we accept as great or ideal. Interesting. We have to give up that imitation, that image of what greatness and an ideal is, to be open for our own development, to free ourselves from our blocks, and go on the actual quest that we're on to actually develop dianoia, understanding, the dialectic, and nous, and phronesis, and to function artfully. And it's a kind of education and nurture, definition and demonstration, the first two categories of the dialectic, that we can take with us wherever we go. It's not a physical thing, it's our development. So whatever we go into our next life, or our next planet, or our next incarnation, or even spiritual experiences, it's an education and nurture we can take with us. And if it's the only kind of thing that is able to be taken with us, then to be mature and rational with our lives should be, how do we spend our time doing that? As much as possible. Compared to eternity, an 80-year human life is very small. And therefore, so when we talked about, well, how should we run the world if we're not just killing people who disagree with our beliefs while pretending to be a knower when we're not, treating the world like nails? Then it was easy to say, well, just that. It's quite straightforward. If that's what we're here for, the education and nurture that can be taken with us, because it's the study that can be applied both to freeing ourselves from problems and the study that allows us for our development cognitively and cognitively is epistemologically, but also ontologically. In other words, a study that can help us function better, but also experience different levels of reality that are greater, extend to higher levels of wholes. If that's our job here, and recognizing that is to be mature and rational, then how you'd run a world would just be to create the conditions for that. It's that simple. It's really straightforward. but only if you've gone through this process. That's one of the amazing things about philosophy. This is why philosophy is one of the many reasons why it's so awesome that we do confetti. Is because once you go through the confusion and the puzzlement and whatever, it becomes simple because you've gone from the many to the one. Then after you apply it, talk about it with your friends over coffee. What's simple becomes obvious. So obviously, if this is the only kind of activity that we can take with us, and it's the thing that benefits everything we do in the world, doesn't matter if you're studying music or studying philosophy or removing our problems, it's the dialectic, then obviously to create the conditions in society for that would be how you would rule. Easy. Which means no hurting people. No need for prisons. Literally, you don't help people address their problems by developing a mastery of the dialectic by genociding them or putting them in prisons or making them fear for their survival through capitalism or destroying their quality of life by polluting the air because of capitalism or creating a prison system where you just you hand the slippery glass of juice by creating through capitalism the conditions for poverty and crime, and then when they drop the glass that you have made slippery, say, oh, prison for you. That's capitalism. So build a giant prison system that happens to benefit the people who make money from it. Instead of doing that, realize, well, hang on a second, let's use the dialectic to find why I'm creating the conditions for problems just so I can inflict injustice and abuse to the people who fall into my trap. And why is there a financial imperative to do so? To maximize profits for shareholders at the expense of the quality of life or life itself of the human beings and the planet. So very simple. Instead of doing all that nonsense, do the opposite. Create the conditions where we can do the dialectic. Easy. It's not hard. How many engineers do we have? Instead of using their engineering education to maximize profits for shareholders by making iPhones that are more likely to fail one day after the warranty expires so you can buy a new iPhone. Instead of using their engineering skill to do that, use their engineering skills to rationally use their intelligence and innovation and technology to rationally, efficiently, renewably meet all of the basic universal human needs of everyone on the planet to free us from work or suffering or fear, needless fear, and so that we can be free. Free to do what? Dialectic. Easy. A dialectic applied to what? Truth, being, and self in philosophy and the cause of our problems in midwifery. Easy. I mean, easy because we've gone through this. If you don't know what midwifery is, if you don't know the dialectic, if you don't have a nose in the text of Socrates and a nose in this text, the Orange Sutra, because the book is orange, midwifery, then it's not simple and easy. But once it is, it is. I guess that's like being a doctor, right? Spend 10 years to learn the ideal and the understanding so that, I can obviously see you've got a broken arm. I can tell because it's not attached to your elbow properly. It's like that. Obvious to me. Okay, so we get that by starting with a question. You need a question first. You have to be okay with getting questions. By the way, if you're like Netanyahu or any of these dictators or rulers who try and claim their beliefs are actually knowledge and try and hammer the world because that's the only thing they know, because that's the only thing they're imitating through belief, then if you are not willing to ask these questions, you have a block to generating questions. I'm so blindly attached to my ego or belief that I don't want any new questions. No questions. So what are politicians famous for doing? Refusing to answer questions. They might do one interview a year, and even in that interview, they want to give speeches. There's no questions in speeches. So all of the Socratic dialogues, like, okay, Socrates starts by saying, I know you love speeches, but let's not do speeches, let's do questions and answers. Let's do dialectic. And Socrates will say, I know your reaction will be, but don't I have the freedom to make speeches? And if you were to say that, says Socrates, I would say, don't I have the freedom to not listen to your dumb speeches? So let's put that aside and actually have a conversation. Dialectic, asking questions. So that's with people, but for ourselves. To begin this quest, we have to generate questions. If we are unwilling to, because of some fear of being confused, or because we have some doubt about our own self-inadequacy, I'm not smart enough to answer questions, so I'm going to be safe and just hang out with only the people who share my opinions. People who love the Cowboys and talk about football, that's all. People who belong to my religion or whatever. So if you're not able to, if you're not open to questions and being puzzled, you have a block. But if you are open, how do we generate new questions? Whatever you've seen, push the implications. If this is true, what else is true? What would follow? How far can we take it? Is there a unifying theme? Oh, I've seen all these things. I've seen these parts. Is there something common? That's a question. What's common among them? Every time a beautiful person comes by, I start to stutter. Interesting. Going from many to the one, similar kind of idea. I've seen many examples of just things, or let's use what we've been talking about, many examples of injustice in our world, tyranny, genocide, capitalism, fascism, Nazism. What's the one? How can I see this all as a whole? Parts into whole. Or what's the one definition of injustice? That all of these are many? That's a question. Is there a definition of injustice? Carry that question as we read, because we're literally reading the material that can allow you to answer that question. Midwifery and philosophy, it's the game, it's the logos. So another question is, all these injustice things, is there a cause? Is there a reason why all these different people? That's the question of cause. Parts to a whole. Even though there are all these examples of injustice, can we see that they are just parts of a greater whole? So that even though there are these physical world experiences of injustice at our part of time in history, are they a part of a greater whole? And if I see the whole, can I see the necessity for these people to have to go through this? Or for us to have to go through this to learn something? In which case there's a justice that is a greater whole, that all of these apparent injustices seem unjust until we see the whole. Here's a question. What's the greater whole? All of these injustices. So again, let's put them together. Okay. Can we find Can we find a unifying theme behind all of these injustices? Interesting. Yeah, it's people defending their personal beliefs or their religious beliefs. Interesting. Many different beliefs, unifying theme. Can we take that's unifying theme? Can we go from the many to a one? Many beliefs. Oh, is this a problem with belief itself? Interesting. Now let's push the implications of that. Cause. What's the cause of beliefs? Push the implications. Interesting. Beliefs have a cause. Is there a necessity for us to develop false beliefs as human beings so that we have to learn how to address it because the beliefs are cause of our problems? We have to instead rise to a greater level of whole, of understanding, so we can address the cause of our problems, which are beliefs. Because there's a principle, you can't solve problems caused by beliefs with beliefs. Einstein's quote, you can't solve problems with the same level of thinking that caused it. In other words, is there a greater whole that beliefs are a part? Push the implications. Ousia. Does this create the conditions for us to reflect on our own self? Our own false beliefs? Is that a kind of learning that shows that there is a greater whole that we're a part of? We are incarnated into a world with problems caused by beliefs, forcing us to reflect on ourselves in a way that people who are pretending to be a knower refuses to do, because they want to cosplay as a knower when they don't know crap. They're hammering the world with their beliefs. Does it force us for self-reflection? And does that show us that even though there is lots of things that suck about being human because of these problems caused by false beliefs, it is a part of a greater whole causing us to turn around on ourselves and understand. Part of our development as souls. Maybe? Push the implications. What is the scope? Does this apply to all people? Does it apply to all beings? This thing that we are being forced to learn about when we ousia, reflect on ourselves, the dialectic, what's its scope? Does it have a scope not only false beliefs, but a scope over understanding? Does the dialectic have a scope over nous or knowledge? How far up does it go? Metaphor. So metaphor is another way of, that's what we're up to right now. So these are all ways of generating questions. Now, metaphor we've already talked about with going from a lower level to a higher. Yeah. In other words, what we are learning about in understanding beliefs, we can say, oh, how does that apply to dianoia and nous? How does what we learn in midwifery apply to philosophy? That's a metaphor from a lower level to a higher level. Now, another way of going is sideways. Now, this is interesting because, and so we've recognized already that what we are doing here is philodianoia, or philodialectic, you could say, the love of dianoia. And our activity, the activity of philosophy, is the dialectic. So we can ask, well, okay, how do we push the implications? The dialectic. Let's have the dialectic on the side here. The dialectic has definition, self to self, demonstration, self to others, division, those others to other others, and then conclusion. Which has two parts, synthesis and analysis, which is those others back to that first self, so self-contained. Can we see all of these ways of generating new questions, which is a necessary first step, not only for meditation, but for learning, for our development, for us to start wondering about things, so then we can go on and discover the parts in learning and then organize their parts in philosophy. Love of learning, philosmethesis, is looking for the parts, taking those parts and bringing them into a whole. That's dialectic. Well, you've defined something. Can you push the implication? How does that thing you've defined demonstrate itself? Push the implication. By the way, that thing, it's functioning, it's demonstration. How can you divide it up in division and apply it in other areas? You're pushing the implications, aren't you? Unifying theme. Oh, of those divisions, can you find a unifying theme? That synthesis. First part of conclusion. Many to a one. By the way, when you have a definition, have you taken the many and defined it as a one? Cause. By the way, we might be in midwifery looking at the way our problems play out in division, or the conclusion, our negative states of mind, our blocks and our failures, but we want to find the cause. We want to go through the dialectic to find, okay, hang on a second, the conclusion. We have this negative idea of ourselves because of all of these experiences. These experiences come from here. What causes all these negative experiences? Well, there must be this thing. Where does that come from? Here. It's a demonstration of something. I demonstrate myself in a certain way, through a certain state of mind, way of thinking. So there's our three: understanding, state of mind or experience, and language, this model here. Right? This is how I act. I act from a certain vision or state of mind, feeling state. That's my experience. I feel something. I use my understanding in a certain way. I communicate and function in a certain way. That ends up with me. That's demonstration. That's how I demonstrate myself. If I demonstrate myself in that state of mind, in that way of talking, using this level of understanding or playing dumb, then it caught this way of demonstration, then acts out in different areas, then I end up with a self-fulfilling prophecy or confirming my bias, because people don't like it when I do that, and so I come to the conclusion that I stink. But what's the cause of our problems? We're going back, aren't we? I end up thinking I stink because that's a conclusion based on my divisions. But the divisions are caused by a certain way of functioning. Here, this goes here. That way of functioning must have been caused by what? What's my fundamental false definition of myself that causes me to function that way at all times, leading to a conclusion that I stink and therefore I was right to begin with? The dialectic is the structure and process, the method, the art of causes. By the way, we start by seeing the parts, the divisions, or our negative states of mind, our conclusion. How do these parts fall into a greater whole? There's the dialectic again. Ousia, at the end of this process, our conclusion we take back to the start. It confirms our self-belief. I was rubbish. So now I confirmed my definition. That makes me more entrenched. Again, debate. I'm just going to confirm the beliefs I already have, making me more entrenched in my way of being, making me more likely to do it in every area, coming to the same conclusion, which then comes back to the start. It's ousia, it's self-reflective, but in a negative, stagnant way. That's the dialectic of our problems. That's what's false. Now, philosophy, you start with the definition of beauty, or justice, or being, or logos, or dialectic. You look at how it demonstrates. So you can do a dialectic on dialectic just based on today. And please do, I encourage you. Then you'd be in the game. Share your work on Discord. You can find a link below. Or share your comments in your work in the chat. A dialectic on dialectic. You're not supposed to get it right first time, by the way. So the people who jump on you, nope, that's not right. They are people who are stuck in their beliefs. They want to play the knower. Why? It doesn't benefit you by saying, oh, you stink. Encourage people to be doing the best thing. And you're not supposed to get it right the first time. Why? Because you'll start with a definition of dialectic. You can do a demonstration of it. This is how it would play out. This is how it can apply to different areas. Midwifery, philosophy, rulership, ruling a shepherd ruling a sheep, a king ruling his people. And this is the conclusion I get. Now, that conclusion is a synthesis from your work that you then analyze, you bring it back to the start, leaving you with a new definition of the dialectic, or whatever it is that you were doing a dialectic on, a new definition, meaning you've grown, You've learned something new. Also, it means you can start again. Using your new definition, push the implications of your new definition. Again, this is the idea, push the implications, keep going. When you've got an insight, celebrate it. Invite your friend for a coffee and celebrate your insight. Celebrate it in the chat. Celebrate it in the comment section. Celebrate it in the Discord. I came to this insight. Celebrate it. Enjoy it. Have fun. And then push the implications. Can you generate an even greater question? Be on an even greater quest. It's another way of saying, use this how does this definition demonstrate itself? And then back to the start again. That's ousia. Does our false definition have a scope over other levels? Or in philosophy, does the true definition of dialectic or beauty or justice have a scope over the other levels? So what are we seeing? We're seeing that these are techniques we can put in a bag, carry with us, to generate new questions, to put us in the right state of mind. Let's do it here. Put us in the right state of mind to develop the understanding let's give this a different color. Green. So we got a green rung here. We got a rail there. Purple rail here. Go down a little bit. So these are ways of developing new questions so that we can put us in a good state of mind that makes us curious and ask questions that are needed to develop our understanding so we can climb that ladder and function, communicate, artfully or excellently. So these are the possible questions that well, not all of them, but these are a whole bunch. Push the implications. Is there a unifying idea or thing behind the many that you see? Is that a way of going from many to the one? Can you go from many examples to one definition? There are lots of ways of going from many to one. What's the cause? Parts to a whole. Can you reflect upon yourself? Is there something that has a scope over all the things that you're noticing? And all of these things are inherent within this very simple two parts, self and other, 4 category thing of the dialectic. Isn't that neat? Now we're up to another way of developing a new question, metaphor. And what's key about that is metaphor can be as above, so below, or it can be sideways. We have been doing our best to see the dialectic in the text as much as we go. Why? Because we are doing 2 things at once. We are doing our first stage of learning, philomathesis, by reading the text, repeating it, reviewing it, talking with our friends, trying to memorize it. But what makes it easier to memorize is, can you take the parts and put it into a structure? So dialectic, the next stage after philomathesis, philosophy, dialectic, actually helps you remember. So we're doing 2 things. By doing the dialectic, we are remembering easier, stage 1, and we are understanding, stage 2, philosophy. For instance, last time, we did a dialectic on the text. We didn't just read the text. Let's review quickly. Here's the text that we read. By the way, each part of the milieu fits properly as a role comes together in a unity, giving a whole, intelligible, the very things we've been discovering. So we can see, for our author to see within our problems, there is a whole that brings together the parts, that comes together in a unity. That's needed for understanding or intelligibility. We're learning about our author. Our author also probably thinks and sees in this way as well. So we are becoming like the master of midwifery, is our goal. So we were reading about how where were we? Greatness, beauty, and justice. Right, we experience an appearance of sincerity, casting an image of beauty and truth. Beauty seems persuasive. The way of understanding the way around us. So the pathologos is a false bringing into a unity, because it makes sense of the way that things are happening around us. Microphone is back on. All right, so let me just fix something here. There we go. A false way of making sense of things. Root cause of our anger, missing piece, keystone. Here we go. The powerful image of knowing is established and identified. Greatness is identified. So greatness, beauty, and justice come together as a model. This is what we read. It's possible to see the differences of each pathologos and the way those qualities are manifested. It becomes the ideal for a group. It's the standards of behavior within the group, the signs of being accepted by the group. It's all structured or framed around the structure. Again, structure, the dialectic is at play around the appearance, but it's based on appearance, not truth. Once established, we play within that, so that becomes our role. It's how we manifest, it's how we play as human beings. We're here to play. What kind of play? Oh, we're really stringent, strict play. And some people live miserable lives. They're playing within such a strict, stringent, miserable structure. That's their role. It's how they play. And then after time, we play out our life for dialectic. We become identified with that role. And then why? The urge towards likeness that imitation provides. That's without that urge towards likeness, there'd be no pathologos. This is a key. This is a keystone. The urge is more fundamental and primitive than desire. So our desire for truth, enlightenment, knowledge, being good, being artful, being just, being mature, figuring out why we're here, doing our job while we're here, experiencing the next levels where we're going after we die, not just understanding it, but actually having a look around. Like, oh, that's where I'm headed. Well, I better get ready. I better prepare for it. These are all desires, but these desires can be sabotaged, hamstrung, cut down by our urge to pretend we know all that when we don't. I know what happens when we die. Nothing. Bollocks. You can actually understand it and experience it. Use both to develop. That's being mature. That's being rational. That's knowing why you're here. That's playing the game well. But why don't we do it? Because the urge is more primal, fundamental, primitive. Before we had the ability to ousia, reflect on self, with the logos and dialectic, we would imitate the caveman leaders, and those would be the humans that survived because they didn't venture out into the cave because they were too scared and obedient. And again, that's the part of our evolutionary nature that tyrants appeal to, or the others are scary. Don't do anything different. Oh, you can get eaten by a tiger if you change in any way. Make America great again the way it was when you were a kid. And then obey me, a tyrant. That's what we have to overcome. That's our next stage of evolution. Preventing us from everything we're actually here for. Our desire to know ourselves, to know our purpose, to experience it, yada yada, all those things. To be rational and mature and have like the highest level of play or fun. You live a miserable life not being able to play because you're stuck in this confines of fear and ignorance caused by an urge to imitate. Why? More primitive. Okay? So we read that, but how are we going to remember it all to tell our friends today over coffee when we meet them for coffee? Because that's what we have to do to learn. Remember it, repeat it. Well, we can structure it in the dialectic. But how so? Well, take that part which we read and then draw a big red line over it because my mouse is silly. There we go. That'll do. So, structure it. What was the defining terms? Greatness, beauty, and justice. The imitation of greatness and beauty and justice. Hey, by the way, over coffee, my friend, do you know we have an image of greatness, beauty, and justice that we get from a young age, from a certain scene where our parents finally reveal themselves? And from that, it sort of makes sense of the crazy crap that we've been dealing with as a baby. Oh yeah, it makes sense. Do you know that becomes our model? These three keywords make a model. It really, yeah. These three definitions, beauty, justice, and greatness, false definitions, but definitions nonetheless, based on images, not truth. Again, Socrates is wired because he doesn't mistake images in the physical world as knowable. He's wiser because he doesn't think he knows things that he doesn't, because he knows what knowing is. That's the real quote, by the way. Put that on your Facebook wall, Grandma. I'm making fun of people who... That's a quote I've often seen on Facebook walls or social media posts by not grandmas, people who want to justify their beliefs as knowing. Boomers and things. Not all boomers, of course. Boomer is a slang term that means people who are very confident in their ignorance. And now their beliefs are stupid. That's why it's irritating. We call them boomers. But they claim that their stupid opinions are true. Why? Well, one thing they do to justify it is, hey, even Socrates doesn't think there's anything as knowledge. So if I want to believe that, my boomer opinions are right. So these are the people who often shares the quotes. People who want to justify not knowing as knowing. Even Socrates says he's wise because he knows he doesn't know. So I don't know, but I'm going to pretend that's what it means to be wise. So, not the real quote. Socrates is wiser because he doesn't make this mistake. That's the real quote. Mistake what? The image of greatness, beauty, and justice for the true model. So these are the definitions. Tell your friends, hey, interested in beauty? Yeah. Care about justice? Oh, big time. Do you want to be great? Interested in greatness? Either yourself or athletes or people that you like? Yeah. By the way, you know that our image of those things become a model? Really? Yeah, we don't even know we're carrying it. It's our model. Wow. Push the implications. Division. You know, it divides up in many different ways. How so? Well, it becomes an ideal for a group. The more you can imitate that model. It's our standard. As soon as you don't do it, then you're a baddie. You're a bad guy. You get beaten up or made fun of or kicked out or shot in the face or genocided. By the way, if you conform to that model, it's a sign of being accepted within the group. Do you know all this is based on the appearance only? Wow, division. Keep going with division. And all of this is So all of these things, this model also divides out into our role that we play within that standard. We become like that role and then become identified with it. That's how the implications of this. So maybe this is demonstration. Maybe all of this is the demonstration and the division is how it plays out. It's up to you. I'm not doing your dialectics. That would be very mean of me. Maybe you'd put these in the division and these in demonstration. Have a play. Nevertheless, we're helping ourselves to remember what we just read so we can do our first stage of reading, philomethesis. And we're also doing the second stage because this is also understanding. So we're killing two birds. Yeah, what a terrible metaphor. We're talking about destroying people and owning people in debates. Like terrible metaphors that really point to how terrible debates are compared to dialectic. But now I say kill the two birds, which is another metaphor based on murder. So we are eating two ice cream cones with one hand, with one mouth. How about that? Kissing two girlfriends with one pair of lips. I don't know. You can create a better metaphor. But we're doing two things at once that are beneficial. Being able to remember what we read for philomethesis and being able to understand how and why it works, philosophy. So it divides out into a role. So definition, these terms. Demonstration, a model. That's the ideal for the group, standard for excellence, signs of being accepted based on appearance. It's an appearance. I think this is actually division. So I'm going to move this. So notice, I didn't get it right first time. I still talked about it, which allowed me to reflect and improve. Neat? Yes. So, these are our definitions, false definitions, becomes our model, standard for behavior, ideal, acceptance, all based on appearance. A model based on appearance, demonstration. Now, division, how does it divide out in your life? Well, your role is played within that standard. And as you live, you play out that role more and more. You become like that role. It starts as a baby, the baby ordering around an adult like mum, and you laugh at it because it's absurd. But then as she grows up, she doesn't change. She becomes more like that role. Now she becomes a bossy boost like mum. It's funny as a kid. It's easy to see as a kid because they're not yet completely like it. They still have some freedom to be themselves, which is the beauty and innocence of children. They are more themselves. They let themselves shine more. They are not yet made like the role. And then as we grow up, we go from babies into adults. We then become identified with our role. We spend our life, we wasted our life becoming more entrenched in our ignorance than doing what we're here to do. Free ourselves from the false beliefs and master an understanding of the truth. Just like okay, my drum roll's not working. Just like debate, you become more entrenched in your ignorance. You don't actually learn anything. So, our life is a debate that should become a dialectic. That could be a bumper sticker for your car. So we can identify with that role. Division. Now, unify it. Bring the many into a one. Is there a common theme? Or is there something more causal? Or is there something that has scope? That's literally the next stage. Synthesis. Therefore, what has the scope? What causes this? An urge towards likeness that imitation provides. This was all based on imitation. To be like the role, imitation. So imitation is a key unifying theme of these divisions. But also what's causal, what causes all of that is an urge towards likeness, to become like. And why? Because it's this urge towards likeness that imitation provides is more fundamental and primitive than desire. That's our conclusion. So this will help us remember it and tell our friends over coffee. or our friends in Discord, or our friends on YouTube in the comment section, please. But that synthesis, then we have to take it back to the start, and I'm not going to do that. I'm going to leave at least one thing open. Given this, that synthesis, that's bringing together into a unity, how can you take this new conclusion back to the start and come to a new definition of greatness, beauty, and justice based on the urge towards likeness that imitation provides, which is more fundamental and primitive to desire? What does that tell you about greatness, beauty, and justice? So, this is the dialectic. But notice, this is all what if greatness and beauty and justice does. What if greatness, beauty, and justice, let's use a different color. All of this that we just went through, let's use, I like this color. Yeah. All of this is what follows if it's a hypothesis, it's not knowing. So be like Socrates and don't mistake this, even this really good understanding, don't mistake it for knowledge. It's a doorway to knowledge, but it's an if. What follows if greatness, beauty, and justice does not exist? Because if greatness, beauty, and justice does not exist, it's not non-being. We're not saying it doesn't have any sort of existence. Not exist means does not exist in being. Therefore, if greatness, beauty, and justice does not exist, we will stuck, just like the leaders who are genociding that we've been talking about today, they are stuck in the imitation of beauty, image, and justice, beauty, greatness, and justice. They think they're being great. They are the genociding Israeli army, backed by most Western forces, claiming to be the most moral army ever, which is complete bullshit, but image of greatness. They think they're doing justice. And this is simply what follows if they don't have it in existence. If they don't know dianoia, not nous, and understand dianoia through the dialectic, the truth of these things, which is universal. Ain't no need to destroy in a debate or destroy in a genocide. Same thing. Debate is of that nature. You invite and include and benefit in dialectic and benefit in true rulership. So what follows if they don't exist? You just have your imitation, which then becomes a model. So all of these things we are seeing within the family equally applies within Israel and Judaism at the moment, or Western capitalism at the moment, or the Catholic and Christian crusades. Same. All of these many examples of injustice can be unified in this system. This simple structure of the dialectic. Isn't it interesting? Yes. And I've lost my sound effects. Let me do it. Wow. 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 I got more and more Owen Wilson-y as I went through my wows. So what follows if it doesn't exist? It's an appearance, becomes your model for all those things we said. You become more like your role. So these older politicians are even more entrenched and identified with their ignorance of being a hammer. I have these dumb opinions and belief, but I want to pretend to be a knower and have art and therefore justify my position. So I'm going to hammer everything. And I'm never going to change my mind. Yes, that's why it's important that we recognize this. And we can see that the older people get, they're more entrenched in their ignorance. That isn't a controversial thing. Of course, the more racist you are and so on and so on, the more entrenched, the more identified with this false model. Why? Because of the urge to likeness being primitive and more fundamental. We can trace even back to our evolution. So all of this is side B of the dialectic. Now, yes, it helps us to understand. Yes, it helps us. Well, it is understanding, and it helps us to remember and talk with our friends. But if our job here, being mature and rational, is to master the art of dialectic, we're only doing half of the work, because this is side B. What follows if it doesn't exist? You are just left with appearances. At the same time, to do the dialectic, we have to do side A, which is what follows if it does exist. That's philosophy. That's why we have to have a nose also in Socrates, in the Platonic texts. So you can say, so another way of generating a question is a metaphor that jumps from side B of the dialectic to side A. Everything we learned here, you can flip to gain an insight, or to at least gain a question about what follows if greatness and beauty and justice does exist in being. What would that mean for you? What would that mean for your purpose here? What would that mean for humanity? What would that mean for the self and reality and consciousness? And the spiritual game, the human game, the philosophy game. Lots of questions you can get. That's metaphor. So metaphor doesn't have to be jumping from one level, like the soul, down to politics, or being a shepherd to being a king. Moving up to a higher level, it can be sideways, which is side B to side A, or vice versa. By recognizing that the dialectic what we're learning in midwifery is what follows if these things don't exist. What follows? Then they're just appearance. That become a belief. That becomes an ideal for group inclusion, acceptance, and behavior based on appearances. That it becomes a role that you play out and stuck in. And then as your life goes on, you become more like that role, till eventually you identify with that role. All caused by this more primitive and fundamental urge towards likeness instead of the desire towards true likeness inside A. So if you did this, you used a metaphor to generate a question, sideways, doing both sides of the dialectic, which is what's needed, you probably will come to a conclusion to do with not being like towards imitation based on desire, not an urge towards likeness based on imitation, but likely you'll come to something towards actually being like your true self, not based on imitation, but on truth. That we are getting through likeness as we are becoming like the author, as we've said, by reading this book in this way. We are becoming like Socrates by reading the Socratic texts in the way that we are. And we are becoming like our true selves because we're reasoning using the logos and dialectic, which is one of the essential natures of the self and one of the highest aspects of being. So if we use this structure of the dialectic, we are becoming more like ourselves, which is our highest desire. And all of that, that's a question. Well, and if you try it, see what happens. Again, share it in the Discord. We have a section on the Discord where you can share your work, share it in the comment section on YouTube. And all of this is a way of generating a new question to keep your movement alive, to stay on a quest, to keep a good wondering state of mind of curiosity, to keep looking for developing understanding in the logos dialectic. And if you keep doing it, you are improving your functioning or your being. Your functioning, and your communication becoming more artful, which is the use of a metaphor to generate questions. So this was also in part a response to a new Discord member who had an insight to do with learning and understanding and models and did really well. And we celebrated that. And then we said, push the implications, take it further. And how can you do that? That's what we're covering. These are maybe you have more ways. Please, if you find more ways of pushing the implications of what you see and understand already, what you see and understand and can see most simply that you can function through it already If you have more techniques to push the implications to give birth to new questions, please share them in the chat or the Discord or the YouTube comment section. And likewise, if you've gained something in this or any other learning, if you've come to a new understanding, insight, or way of being, please use that, push the implications in all of these kinds of different ways, which are all just the dialectic, aspects of the dialectic, to generate and birth new questions, because to carry a question is to be on a quest. And that's what we're going to be doing next time with the next section of the text. Reading it, philomathesis, structuring it so we can remember philomathesis, repeat philomathesis, and also understand philosophy. And then anything we get will generate new questions, putting us in a state of openness and wonder and curiosity, allowing us to be receptive to the logos unfolding from the self to ourself on our journey, our real journey, our true game that we can play in, unbound by any imitation or appearance, to be most like ourselves in the most fun way possible. On that, thank you so much for joining me. I hope to see you next time. And my outro music is... Okay, no outro music because something happened during the stream, so I will sing. Thank you for joining me. Okay, that was wrong. Try that again. And thank you for joining me, and I hope to see you next time.